and welcome to another episode of the Average Joe Football Show. I'm your host, Joe Fair. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. Even as news around the NFL continues to slow down, we're kind of hitting the slow period of the NFL offseason where there's not really a whole lot of news. I appreciate you guys still tuning into the show and making it a point to make this show a part of your day. I really appreciate that. This week it's been a really slow week as far as NFL news goes. Obviously, the news going on around the world with all the protests and all of the stuff like that going on, it kind of overshadows any small NFL news that's been going on this week. But overall, it's been a slow NFL news week. I think today we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of going into the news, because there is not very much news, I think I'm going to take a little bit of time at the top of the show just to kind of get into some of the things going on in the world right now as the protests and the racial inequality debate continues to chug along, and it's slowly starting to intercede into the NFL world, and we're seeing NFL players joining in protests. And this week we saw Drew Brees putting his foot in his mouth with a comment that he made, and then we had Jake Fromm putting his whole lower half of his body in his mouth with a text that he sent when he was in college. So we see the events in the real world sort of trying to or very much succeeding at interceding into the NFL world. So I figured I would not do that a disservice and just ignore it. I don't want to get too far into it, but I wanted to, instead of going through the news and talking about stuff like the New York Jets trying to coax Kyle Long out of retirement, I would maybe talk about something a little important, a little bit more relatable, and just kind of have a short discussion with you guys, as much of a discussion as I can have when it's just me talking and you guys listening, just to kind of go over what's going on and where we can go from here and how the NFL is going to be affected by all of this. So to start things off, this week Drew Brees was doing an interview, I believe with Yahoo Sports. I could be wrong, but he was doing an interview this week in which he was asked what his thoughts would be on players potentially taking a knee this year in protest, obviously to protest the racial injustice and inequality as far as the policing goes, and just the overall racial injustice in the United States of America. And his response was the response that a lot of people have, and that was he's never going to support somebody disrespecting the flag. He's never going to support somebody disrespecting our troops. And he proceeded to be completely crucified this week by basically everybody, including his teammates. He really had a lot of his teammates upset at him. Obviously, they don't believe that the protest that they're doing is not to disrespect the troops. It's not to disrespect the flag. So there was a lot of people just crucifying Drew Brees this week. And in my honest opinion, I don't totally agree with what Drew Brees has said. I'm not a big patriotism person myself. I am patriotic. I do love my country. I'm Canadian, obviously. I'm not American, but I love the fact that I get to grow up I've gotten to grow up rather, and I'm now living in a great country where I'm free, and I have obviously all these great privileges. But overall patriotism, I think that the people in the United States, in my opinion, can overdo it with the patriotism thing a little bit much. I understand supporting your troops, and obviously they've given a sacrifice bigger than anything I can imagine. Myself, I will never be able to comprehend the sacrifice that they've given. And again, this is not a disrespect to the troops. This is not a disrespect to people that fought in wars. This is more so these players trying to get your attention. And Drew Brees got that explained to him this week from his teammates. I believe they had some meetings this week after he had said this, and And overall, my initial reaction was that I think the people overreacted to his statement a little bit, but I think overall, in the end, good came from it. I think Drew Brees ended up seeing things from a different perspective, and you can say that what Drew Brees said this week, where he had his grandfather and his ancestors, they fought in wars, and that's why he felt that it was not respectful to kneel during the anthem. But you also look at it from a different perspective. There was African Americans fighting in those same wars alongside Drew Brees' grandparents and his great grandparents and all that, and they fought in those same wars, sacrificed those same things, and they came back to a country that didn't accept them. They came back to a country that didn't want them, didn't perceive them as human beings, even though they just put their life on the line, give you the ultimate sacrifice, some of them, dying in battle for their country, for a country that doesn't even accept them or respect them. I mean, to me, it's just about seeing things from a different perspective, and this goes on both sides. There's been a lot of fighting, a lot of negativity on social media this week, obviously with everything going on, and I would just encourage you to just look at things from a different perspective. The argument constantly comes up when it comes to kneeling and protesting, that the protesters are disrespecting the flag, and I think that's so far from the truth. Later on in the week, Drew Brees, when having a discussion with his teammates, afterwards, it seemed like he really took some things to heart, and he really changed his mind. I thought he did a good job of saving face, I guess. A lot of people thought that maybe it was just his PR team digging him out of this hole that he built, but I thought when he made a statement towards the President of the United States later on in the week, and I really enjoyed the statement, and I thought it showed that he had grown through this whole situation, and he had kind of seen things from a different perspective. And his statement on Instagram towards Donald Trump was, to Donald Trump, through my ongoing conversations with friends, teammates, and leaders in the Black community, I realize this is not an issue about the American flag. It has never been. We can no longer use the flag to turn people away or distract from the real issues that face our Black communities. We did this back in 2017, and regretfully, I brought it back to with my comments this week. We must stop talking about the flag and shift our attention to the real issues of systematic racial injustice, economic oppression, police brutality, and judicial and prison reform. We are at a critical juncture in our nation's history. If not now, when? We as a white community need to listen and learn from the pain and suffering of our Black communities. We must acknowledge the problems, identify the solutions, and then put this into action. The Black community cannot do this alone. This will require all of us. So I really like that comment by Drew Brees, and I think it's because I can relate to where he's coming from. I remember when Colin Kaepernick first took a knee during the preseason game in 2016. I can remember where I was when I found out that he had taken a knee. And my immediate reaction was probably the reaction that most people have, or most people had, especially somebody like me, a white person. And my immediate reaction was, that's disrespectful. He should stand. I thought he was making it all about him. I thought he was trying to just get all this attention on him, and I was really bitter towards Colin Kaepernick, as was Drew Brees, and I was really just blinded by I think patriotism or stuff that we've been brought up in, stuff that we've just heard over and over again, and it took me a few months before I kind of decided to look at it from a different perspective and see it from Colin Kaepernick's perspective, see it from the perspective of the Black community, and realize this is not about patriotism. This is not about the flag. This is about something bigger than the flag, than the piece of fabric that's hanging on the flagpole. This is about social justice. This is about people feeling like they're not treated equally. And even if you do not believe that there is racism in the NFL, there is racism in society, I think that's an ignorant statement to make. I think there's racism from all sides and hate from all sides. But even if you think that racism is overblown, or that there is not these problems in society, they're just trying to get your attention, to have an open and honest discussion about the racial injustice, about the things that they believe in. And I think that's something that our society lacks so much now, is as soon as you see something that you might potentially disagree with, your immediate response is to get defensive, yell, and shut down, and just and call names, and just rant on Twitter, when I think what we need right now as a society is the exact opposite. We need discussion. We need to improve. We need to move forward. We need to work together instead of tearing each other apart. And this goes for people who were anti this protest this week, people who were anti-rioting this week, and this goes for people in those protests, people that were rioting and looting and destroying buildings and setting buildings on fire. Those are the people on that side that I think need to look in the mirror and say, are we building relationship? Are we helping our cause? And I think that the peaceful protesters, I am 100% behind. I will fight for anybody's right to peacefully protest, because that's what makes a country like the United States of America so beautiful, is the freedom of speech, is the freedom to protest peacefully. I do not obviously agree with the looting and the setting on fire, but I don't think most people at those protests, most Black Lives Matter activists, agree with the looting either. Those are just a few bad situations there during those protests. Just like when we talk about the police and the policing, we have people on the right side, we'll just say the people on the right side saying, oh, there's just a few bad police officers. There's just a few bad police officers that make the rest of the police look bad. Well, it goes the same way with the people that are protesting. For the most part, these protests are peaceful protests, and they have an incredible message and something that we need to listen to. But there's just a few bad apples that burn down buildings, that are violent, that kind of spoil the whole bunch. And I just want to encourage people to not be afraid to have discussions during this time. Don't be afraid to have your mind changed. I started off completely in a different mindset, in a different point of view on this whole Colin Kaepernick situation. I started off totally disagreeing with him, but I found that I eventually had my mind changed when I sat back and I tried to understand where he was coming from, where he's been, what he's experienced, why he's doing this, why he feels like he needs to do this. So I would just encourage you to not take this lightly. Have discussions with people in your life. Have discussions with your family, with your friends, and don't be afraid to have your mind change in times like this. And I would just want to encourage you to just love, like I did last week. Just choose love. Just respect each other, and we need to work towards getting better. If we're not working towards getting better, what are we working for? Moving right along to the next segment of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed my opening discussion, my monologue type deal that I did there. That was all from the heart. I usually like to have things written down, have a little bit of a rundown of what I'm going to say, but I just wanted to kind of speak from the heart and say what's on my mind about all of this stuff going on, and I hope that you could take something from that. And if not, then this part of the show is for you. The more fun, unimportant part of the show. This week, we had some sports news. The NFL news was obviously a little slow this week, like we discussed already. But in other sports news, this week, I believe it was last week actually, the NHL announced that it was coming back, doing a 24-team playoff, I believe. And now the NBA actually this week announced that they're coming back in 2 months. July 30th, I believe, is the date that the season will start. And they're going to do 8 regular season games, and then they're going to jump right into a playoff after they weed out 22 teams down to 16 teams. Obviously, if you guys have listened to this show, you know that I'm a big fan of the NBA. I'm a big basketball fan. I really love the Toronto Raptors, so I'm really excited. And I thought, in a week where NFL news is pretty slow and we're kind of in a slow period, why not have a little fun? And I'm going to create my starting five, a starting five NBA basketball team made up of just NFL players. So I'm going to take 5 NFL players that I think could make a pretty decent starting five, and just to kind of celebrate the NBA coming back. I'm excited. It definitely is a good sign, seeing the NBA come back, that maybe things are transitioning more back to normal, and hopefully that means that we'll have NFL football in the upcoming season, and hopefully we can even have fans in attendance and go back to a little normalcy. So when it comes to building a basketball team made up of strictly NFL football players, I had a lot of fun doing this week. This is something that I thought about for a few days. I put maybe too much work into making this team. It's sort of a silly concept, but I think there are some guys in the NFL that are just athletic freaks, that guys that can do amazing things on the football field, and to me, there's no way those things don't transition into other sports. I guarantee you all these guys are tremendous athletes in different areas of sport. So I decided this week to build a starting five basketball team made up of strictly NFL players. I just have a regular starting five. Obviously, the NBA is more moving towards positionless basketball, where there's maybe not as many positions anymore. You just have really tall, talented athletes playing all positions. But I went back to the starting five. I have a point guard, shooting guard, small forward, a power forward, and a center. So just your basic starting five. And let's just jump into it. My point guard, this is the leader of the team. I was looking for somebody who could come in, be the leader, is a tremendous passer, but can do other things, is athletic, somebody who's maybe twitchy, can make some plays on his own, lose the defense, so he's quick, he can pass, he's probably the smallest guy on the team, so maybe not looking for a 6'5", 6'6" dude. So I'm looking for somebody like that, and to me, my point guard on my starting five is quarterback Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. And this pick is maybe a little bit questionable because, the guy is listed at 5'10", 207 pounds, and I think that's extremely generous. Listed there on the Pro Football Reference page. I think 5'10", 207 is extremely, extremely generous. But to me, Kyler Murray, we've seen he can play baseball. He was a number one pick in the MLB draft, and he was gonna play baseball until he obviously decided to play football. So he's extremely athletic and he's extremely versatile. And the guy, obviously, he's a good passer. That was the best part of his game at Oklahoma and in the NFL. He's got just a tremendous eye for the field and just athletically gifted as far as throwing the ball and fitting passes into tight windows, which is something you want from your point guard. And he's just so tiny and elusive and quick. I think he could make defenders miss at the point guard position. He can make a couple plays on his own. He's quick. He'll outrun guys. I think he'll just play quick and maybe play some gritty defense. Obviously, we don't really see that on the NFL field, but I think that he's a guy that just seems like a point guard to me. When I was looking for my point guard, I was looking for, obviously as a Raptors fan, I'm a little biased. I was looking for a Kyle Lowry type of guy, and I think this guy fits the bill. Kyler Murray is 5'10", 207 pounds, and Kyle Lowry is a 6-foot guy, 196 pounds, so just undersized guys that can still really, really make plays. And I see Kyler Murray as a tremendous point guard for this team, and maybe in the mold of a Kyle Lowry or an Isaiah Thomas back when he was in his prime. We've seen small guys do some damage in the NBA, obviously. So Kyler Murray is my point guard. Moving on to the other guard position as we finish out this backcourt. I thought, in my point guard, I had a purely offensive guy, a guy who's going to make offensive plays. And on most of my starting five here, I actually have purely just offensive players, except for here at the shooting guard position. My thoughts going into this was I'm looking for a guy that's kind of like Patrick Beverley, who plays on the Los Angeles Clippers. For those of you that don't know what Patrick Beverley is all about, who the guy is, he's a 6 foot, 195 pound shooting guard, undersized guy. He plays point guard / shooting guard. He's a versatile guy, and he's just an incredible defender, one of the best defenders in the NBA. He's a guy who's gonna steal the ball. He's gonna play extremely good defense, and he's gonna get in your face. And he's got like really really good star players ejected. He always seems to get in the face of Kevin Durant every time he plays against him. So I wanted to find me a guy who's maybe not the biggest guy, but I want to find a defensive guy, somebody who's going to create turnovers, create big plays on the defensive end, play scrappy defense, and get in the face of the opponents and get in their head. And to me, one guy stuck out. I was looking at the cornerback position. Cornerbacks often have guys that are just chippy and smack talkers and always talking crap to the receivers. So to me, Marcus Peters, the defensive back for the Baltimore Ravens, is my pick for my shooting guard. We need a defensive guy. I have all offensive guys on the starting five. So that was my first area. I was looking for a guy to put here that was a defensive player in the NFL. But I love, he's just a scrappy, in-your-face guy. He'll sometimes maybe take it a little bit too far. But you want a guy like that on your team, a guy who's going to go out there and just talk crap, get in the face of the opponents, and play extremely good defense. The guy produces turnovers. He's got 27 picks in 5 years in the NFL. I mean, it seems like every year, I believe every year except for one, he has at least 5 interceptions on the season. So he's obviously really, really good at creating turnovers and turning them into big plays. He's got a lot of touchdowns off those turnovers. So to me, Marcus Peters, he's very much a similar body type to a Patrick Beverley, and I like having him and Kyler Murray in my backcourt. Now moving on to the small forward position, we're going to start to build my wings here. The small forward position, I was looking for who's the best small forward in the NBA today, who's the best player really in the NBA, and it's LeBron James. So I'm looking for my LeBron James. Easier said than done. Obviously, LeBron James is a monster of a man, just athletically gifted and is tremendously talented. But I looked for a guy who's big, who can move, who I think can really just do it all. And to me, it's a guy who doesn't have a job in the NFL right now. So my small forward is Cam Newton, the quarterback, free agent right now. Can't believe he's still a free agent, but obviously comparing him to LeBron James, it may be a little bit of a stretch, but I was just looking for a big dude. LeBron is 6'9", 250 pounds. Cam Newton's 6'5", so, 4 inches smaller, but still big in NFL standards. He's 245 pounds. And if you look at Cam Newton, he's just a monster of a man, and he's a do-it-all type of guy. In the NFL, he can pass the ball, obviously, as a quarterback, and he's one of the best running quarterbacks we've seen the past decade. He's played at an MVP level. We know he has the ability to turn it on and be an MVP in all NBA, if you want to go there, an all pro type of player. Obviously, he's a free agent right now, but to me, he's just a monster, a massive humanity, like LeBron James, an athletic freak, a guy who's going to give you everything, a guy who's not afraid of contact, and it's just a guy who's going to be hard to stop. We've seen Cam Newton, when he's healthy, just truck over defenders on his way to the end zone, and LeBron's very much the same way. If it doesn't matter if you foul him, if he's on his way to the basket, he's going to find a way to score through contact, and that's why I chose Cam Newton as my small forward. Moving on to the other forward position, the power forward position. This is kind of a a position that doesn't get a whole lot of love in the NBA anymore. That and the center position, it seems like we're just kind of moving towards two small forwards and maybe not even having a center. So for me, I look for a guy, as a power forward. I want a guy who's going to go in there and grab rebounds, who's gonna play aggressive. And then I looked for a guy who can jump, a guy who can maybe throw down some sweet dunks, get people fired up. And I looked for maybe a Dwight Howard type. Obviously Dwight Howard, he's 6'10", 265, big guy. Just has some of the greatest highlight dunks you'll see, and is a tremendous rebounder, one of the best rebounders we've ever seen. So I couldn't really find anybody close to Dwight Howard as far as size goes, 6'10". But my guy at the power forward position is Mike Evans, the wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Bucks. To me, he's just a guy who his best work is done up in the air. You throw him those 50-50 balls, he's going to go up and grab them. He's not afraid to get down and dirty, grab those rebounds. They often talk about receivers and tight ends as rebounders, guys who are going to go up and just take the ball away from you. And obviously he can jump out the gym. He's got incredible vertical, and he's just a huge dude. As a receiver, he's 6'5", 231 pounds. As far as height goes, maybe not the tallest guy in the NBA, but we kind of have to go with a smaller ball lineup here because it's NFL players, not NBA players. So I just want a guy who's not afraid of contact, not afraid of getting up there, getting down and dirty, and grabbing rebounds and playing good defense. So that's why I chose Mike Evans as my power forward. And moving on to the final position on my starting five here for my NBA team, and I need a center. I need a big guy who's going to go in there and play in the center of my offense and defend the rim on defense. And to me, I looked over my team. I looked over these four guys, and I realized I'm lacking height. It's not a very tall team. My tallest player is Mike Evans and Cam Newton are both 6'5". 6'5", that's tall in the NFL. It's really not that tall in the NBA. So I need to find me a guy who's tall, who can just be a little bit of size for me at the center position. Unfortunately, there's no 7-footers in the NFL. I looked it up. Nobody is 7 feet tall, but I went out and I got the tallest guy I could find to be my center on my team. But I didn't just pick any player. I didn't just pick a guy because he's tall. I picked somebody who I thought could come in and contribute on this basketball team. And to me, my center is Alejandro Villanueva, the left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This guy has such an interesting story. I never really heard his full story until I started researching some things about him for this silly exercise. But so the guy he's 6'9", 320 pounds, which is just so scary. Holy smokes, 6'9", 320 pounds. Now nobody in the NFL or in the NBA rather is 320 pounds. Most guys, are closer to 200. The heavier guys, maybe around 250. The guy that I tried to compare Alejandro Villanueva to is a guy like Nikola Jokic for the Denver Nuggets. He's 7 feet tall, 253 pounds, and he looks quite chubby. I'm not gonna lie, he's not doesn't look like he's in the greatest shape. But you're thinking 320 pounds. This guy's not going to be able to move with these NBA players. Well, a little fun fact about Alejandro Villanueva. For those of you that didn't know, he played his college football. Obviously, he was part of the Army team, so he went to Army. He played for Army, and when he was there, he actually played multiple positions, including so he played left tackle like he does in the NFL. He also played defensive lineman, and then he also played wide receiver. That's 6'9", wide receiver. This guy legitimately played wide receiver at 6'9", and he's now 320 pounds. But as a receiver, he got down to 290 pounds, which is still just so big for a receiver. That's absurd. So this guy might be big right now. He's 320 pounds. But I think we bring him on to the average Joe starting five here, the NBA team, and I think we can get him down back to 290 or get him closer to where he can be a little bit more agile, a little bit be able to move around his weight a little bit. 290 is still extremely heavy, but he's a big dude. He's 6'9". Let's try to get him down. Get him back down to NBA playing weight. I mean, the guy's versatile. He's played offensive lineman, defensive lineman, wide receiver. He was originally recruited as a tight end. So this guy he'll do whatever you tell him to do, honestly. He just loves playing. And I want a guy like this on my basketball team. I think we need a guy who's not going to be scared to get down and dirty again. And I think who's more not scared than an offensive lineman. They're down in the trenches doing the dirty work all the time. So give me Alejandro Villanueva. The guy's just an athletic freak. Another fun fact, when he made it to the NFL, so he bounced around a couple teams. He ended up serving a couple years here and there overseas on a couple tours with the Army. But he never gave up on his NFL dream. Eventually, in 2014, he got signed by the Philadelphia Eagles to play defensive end. Actually, he didn't play offensive lineman right away. So he originally got signed by the Philadelphia Eagles. Eventually, he was cut. At the time he was cut with the Philadelphia Eagles, he weighed 250 pounds. So he got back down to 250 pounds, and then he got signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he rose up to 340 pounds within a year. That is absurd. I don't understand how you can gain that much weight. That's 90 pounds. There are some people that are 90 pounds. I mean, if you want to just be utterly stunned, go and look at Alejandro Villanueva's story and how he got to the NFL. It's really quite amazing. But yeah, I'm really excited to have him as my center on my NFL basketball team here. So just to recap, I have in the backcourt, my point guard is Kyler Murray, small little guy. He can run in between people's legs if he has to. Shooting guard Marcus Peters. I'm just gonna try to get people ejected with him. And then I have at the small forward position, we got Mike Evans, Cam Newton at the small forward position, and I have Mike Evans at the power forward position, and obviously Alejandro Villanueva. Rounding it out at the center position. All right, moving on to the final segment of today's show. I asked you guys this week on Instagram, on my Instagram story. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at _AverageJoeShow if you want to keep up to date on the show and discuss. I asked you guys this week on my Instagram story for any questions. I was doing a mailbag, so we're going to hit the mailbag. And just answer some of your guys' questions. Any questions you guys have NFL related. So yeah, like if you're listening to this show and you say, hey, I have some questions, then please follow me, Instagram, Twitter, please. I'm begging, apparently. I've said please a couple times. So just give me a follow if you want to discuss football and if you want to be up to date on the show. Please do that. Also, you can email me at theaveragejoeshowpod@gmail.com. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into the mailbag. I picked out 3 questions from you guys, and we're just going to kind of go through them and give you guys my opinions, my thoughts, and hopefully we can make the mailbag a semi-regular thing on this show. I really enjoy interacting with people that listen to the show, so why don't we just jump into the first question. And the first question here comes from one of you guys, and it says, will the 49ers have a Super Bowl hangover? This is a really good question. Obviously, we've talked about this a few times during this podcast. And to me, I picked them during the NFL superlatives thing, the most likely to fall off. So obviously a little bit, I feel like this could happen. We've seen it happen a few times. Last year, the Los Angeles Rams did not make the playoffs after going all the way to the Super Bowl. being the NFC representative in the Super Bowl. And we've seen this a few times where a team will lose in the Super Bowl and not be able to get back. We've seen the Falcons when they lost so brutally to the Patriots. I believe they did make it back the next year, but since that point, they really haven't been able to get back there, climb that mountain again, and this time succeed and win. So to me, you look at the 49ers, they have a good enough roster to not even worry about a Super Bowl hangover. They have an extremely talented roster. Coaching-wise, I think Kyle Shanahan's one of the best coaches in the NFL. I mean, just watching some of the plays he draws up with some of these pre-snap motions and stuff, it's really, really fun to watch on Game Pass, watching some of the stuff that he draws up. And obviously their defensive line is incredible. They lost DeForest Buckner, but they went out and got a guy who has the potential to be just as talented in the draft. So the defensive line there is still extremely talented. I think they need a little bit of work on the secondary. Richard Sherman, we saw him get absolutely exposed in the Super Bowl by speed. He's still a really, really good corner, don't get me wrong, but I think he can get exposed by some of these younger, faster receivers sometimes. So their secondary could potentially be a point of weakness. They have really good linebackers with Quan Alexander and those guys there. I think that could be another strength as he comes back from that injury. And hopefully D Ford comes back and he can play along that defensive line, play more than he did last year. And offensively, you have some really talented receivers. Deebo Samuel, who they got. They also got the guy Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State there in the first round, who's a very similar receiver to Deebo Samuel. So they have some really good receivers. And running back wise, obviously Kyle Shanahan just schemes up some really good things for those running backs. So you look at the roster, you're thinking this team cannot have a Super Bowl hangover. They're a really, really good team, but I think their division this year is going to be a lot tougher than it was last year. Obviously, we have the Arizona Cardinals, who I absolutely love. I talked them up a ton, maybe talked about them too much, but I love the Arizona Cardinals. The Seahawks are going to be competitive every year with Russell Wilson, probably one of the best quarterbacks in football. And you have the Rams, who I think, either they're going to bounce back or they could be, if they don't bounce back, they could be bottom of this division, because this division is tough. This could be the toughest division in football. So you have that going for you, or going against you if you're the Niners. And then you have, a quarterback that you didn't trust to throw more than 8 passes at certain points in the Super Bowl. To me, if this team wants to not have that Super Bowl hangover, they need to get more from Jimmy Garoppolo. I think Jimmy Garoppolo has the potential to be a franchise quarterback, has the potential to be better than he has been, but we need to see it from him. We need to see Kyle Shanahan trust Jimmy Garoppolo more than he has. So for me, I think defenses are gonna figure out this run game. They're gonna sell out to stop the run. They're going to stack the box. They're gonna bring extra defenders, make it really hard to run on them, and they're gonna make Jimmy Garoppolo beat them. So to me, this rests on the shoulders of Jimmy Garoppolo. So going back to your question, will the 49ers have a Super Bowl hangover? I can't say for sure. I'll say yes, because I don't think they're going to be as successful as they were last year. Last year, they really just wreaked havoc throughout the regular season and in the postseason. I'm not saying that they're not going to be back in the postseason and maybe even competing for a Super Bowl. I think they have a good chance to have that Super Bowl hangover because of how tough that division is, because we have a quarterback that we don't know if they even trust at this point. Moving on to another question here from you guys, the second question, and this is another really good question. It says, how much does Gronk have left in the tank? That's a good question. This is something that I've thought about a lot. Obviously, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are super hyped up this season. They've built a really good offense there, and Gronk went and joined Brady, and some people are just assuming that they're going to go back to their dominant ways. But we saw Gronkowski when he was retired talking about his various injuries and the stuff that he struggled with as an NFL player. He's been injured a lot. He has a ton of injuries. You can tell it was taking a toll on him. And not only that, when he retired, he lost somewhere up to at least 20 pounds. It looks to me, pictures, Gronk says he lost 20 pounds. To me, it looks like he lost quite a bit more than 20 pounds. He was super skinny. But apparently he says he's ready to get back to playing weight. He probably feels like he is back to playing weight. So to me, it really comes down to answering this question. It comes down to, I don't think that Rob Gronkowski needs to be who he was, the dominant tight end that he was in New England. You go back to those New England Super Bowl runs, receiver-wise and weapon-wise, there's not a whole lot of elite talent on those teams. So Gronkowski really needed to take the brunt of the load, to take a lot of the team on his shoulders and make dominant plays. Because you only had really Julian Edelman and Josh Gordon for a little bit, and then basically Tom Brady was thrown to a bunch of grocery store baggers. But to me, I don't think he needs to be that in Tampa Bay. So to answer your question, how much does he have left in the tank? I think he has enough left in the tank. He might not be the same Gronk that we've seen in the past, but I think he has enough to bring this offense to another level. As a Dolphins fan, I've seen Gronkowski and Brady completely destroy my heart as a Dolphins fan during games. And one thing that I can remember them doing often is something that I think Gronk needs to do this season, and that's, the Dolphins will be playing the Patriots. It's usually a primetime game for some reason. They're playing on primetime, and you're like, the Dolphins seem to be holding their own, but the Patriots offense is still clicking, and Tom Brady's getting all these dump off passes to Chris Hogan and Julian Edelman, and these passes out to the running backs, and you're like, okay, things are not going that well, but we're hanging in it, and then all of a sudden Brady hits Gronkowski down the field on a seam for a 30-yard gain. Gronk breaks 4 or 5 tackles and just blows up the game, gives this team so much momentum, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that Gronk is on this team. And that happened often watching this Patriots team. They would kind of go away from him a little bit, and then he would come out of nowhere, and he would just completely light a fire under the butts of that team. And to me, that's what I think Gronk needs to do this season, is just, he doesn't need to be that dominant, best tight end ever that we've seen him be in the past. He can be more of a quiet secret weapon, I guess, as quiet and as secret as a guy named Gronk can be. But you have so much talent on this team offensively. You have Mike Evans, obviously. You have, even at the tight end position, you have Cameron Brate, you have O.J. Howard. Obviously, Chris Godwin is there. There's so much talent as far as the receiving game goes. Gronk doesn't need to take that load on him anymore, and he can be a guy who makes 2 or 3 really, really big plays that breaks open the game. So to me, you're asking how much does Gronk have left in the tank? I think he has just enough left in the tank. Moving on to the final question of the show, and it's another really, really good question, one that I hadn't thought about too much, but I appreciate the question. It is most underrated defense heading into the 2021 or 2020-2021 season. Really good question. Thanks. Appreciate the question. I did some research. I looked over and I tried really, really hard to pick a team that I haven't talked much about, a team that maybe doesn't get as much play in the media. And I looked at certain teams. Obviously, there are certain teams that have defenses that we know. Obviously, the Chicago Bears, all they have really is defense. They are a dominant defense. Offensively, they might not have much there, but defensively, they're good. We know the Chicago Bears have a good defense. They're not underrated. You talk about a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers last year, the same situation. Offense wasn't there. Their defense was phenomenal last year with Minkah Fitzpatrick and all those other weapons. A really underrated defensive line there. So we know the Steelers have that elite defense. We know, we know certain teams have really good defense. Obviously, 49ers last year. And then I tried to find teams that maybe we didn't know their defenses were, as good as they are. I look at certain teams like the Buffalo Bills. I've been talking about a lot. I really like what they're doing. I think their defense is really underrated. They have one of the best defenses last year already. But fans rather just continue to sleep on the Bills. They could be a potential pick here. I looked at the Packers. I think they have a pretty good defensive unit overall. They have a couple young corners and safeties that could develop into really good players. And that defensive line is, I would say, actually quite underrated. With obviously you have Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith there, who wreaked havoc last year. Really good free agent signings. So I think the Packers could be good. They have maybe a couple holes at the linebacker position they maybe need to cover up for, but I really tried to pick a team that that we haven't talked much about, but spoiler alert, I failed. I picked a team that we just talked about in the question before this. I'm sorry guys, but it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, they have an extremely underrated defense. And I think it's underrated because of how much we talk about their offense. We talk about the Tom Brady, we talk about Gronk, talk about Mike Evans, talk about Chris Godwin, all those guys there. But you take a look and really look at this defense. Quietly, there's talent on this team. This could be a really good defense, and that I think should be really scary for other teams in the NFL, because we know this offense will at least be good enough with the pieces that they have. They should be great, but obviously that's a lot of pressure to put on a team, but they should be great. The defense has a potential to be really great as well. I mean, you coming off the edge, you have Shaq Barrett, who led the league in sacks last year, was a monster. Got the franchise tag, nearly broke the sack record last year. And then Jason Pierre-Paul, who's just been a consistent edge rusher his whole career. Inside, you have Ndamukong Suh, who may not be as good as he once was. Shout out to Toby Keith, but he may not be the dominant number one defensive tackle in the NFL like he used to be, but he's still just a really strong interior defender. And you have him matched up with the young Vita Vea, who also is really coming into his own. After we thought maybe he would be sort of a bust, he's really come into his own the last couple of years there on that defensive line. So you have the defensive line. That's one of the better defensive lines in football right there. Just those four guys. Then you look at the corner positions and safety. You have Jamel Dean. I believe it's Jamel Dean. He's the guy who ran really fast at the combine, and he struggled early last year in his rookie season, but really came into his own later on in the season. And PFF gives him a pretty good grade. He got a 76 overall grade. That's the 12th ranked corner in football. And then you have some other young guys like Sean Murphy Bunting there in the slot. And the secondary is pretty underrated. Carlton Davis at the other cornerback position, another younger guy. And then the safety position, we have Justin Evans, who's a pretty decent safety. But then they went out and they drafted Antoine Winfield Jr. During the draft, who was a guy that I really liked in the draft. He was a just a guy who's undersized maybe, but can hit hard, make big plays, and just really change that defense, and I think develop into a really good player. And then we haven't even talked about the linebacker position. At linebacker, you have a guy in Levante David, who is one of the best linebackers we've seen in the past decade. He does not get talked about nearly enough. Levante David is a phenomenal linebacker. He was snubbed from the All-Pro team. I mean, he's just a really good player that's not talked about enough. And then alongside him, you have Devin White, who was the best linebacker in the draft just a couple years ago, and I think he could really develop into a franchise type player. But those are two guys at the linebacker position who have one is elite, one is a fantastic player in Levante David, and Devin White has the potential to turn into an elite player there at the linebacker position. So to me, as much as we talked about them, and I'm sorry, I know you guys are probably sick of talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. To me, their defense is the most underrated defense heading into this NFL season. Their defense is just not talked about enough. Their offense is obviously amazing and great and has all those weapons, but their defense could be a top tier defense despite struggling last year. I could see tremendous improvement on this defensive side for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I hope I answered your question sufficiently. the Tampa Bay Bucs are my most underrated defense heading into this season. If you have any discussions, please, or any disagreements, if you don't like me continuing to talk about the Buccaneers or on any of these questions, or you have further questions, please DM me at any point. Don't wait for me to put an Instagram story up. Don't wait for me to post on Twitter. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I would love to do another mailbag episode, have some questions answered for you guys, and have some discussions. We have some really exciting things we're planning on doing in the future. Maybe going to get some guests on the show, and continue to just try to have discussions with you guys. And eventually I'm going to go through and have my position rankings for the 2020 season, going into the 2020 season, go over my top 5 at each position. So some exciting things in the future. Obviously, it's a slow time in the NFL right now, but really excited. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope you guys will continue to listen to the show. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _ the Average Joe Show. Make sure you follow us. Keep up to date with what we're doing, and also check back every Tuesday on whatever podcast site you listen to the show on. Check back and for new episodes. Also, if you're listening to this show on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to leave a rating and a review. I would very much appreciate that. Don't forget to share the show with other football fans that you might have in your life. If you like the show, don't hesitate to share it and spread it around. Again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys very much for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.